Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Kim, and I hope you're having a fabulous day today. If you are interested in true crime stories like I am, I hope that you consider hitting that subscribe button. But either way, thanks for being here. Today we're going to be talking about Kali Ann Poulton. It was a beautiful day when Kali went outside to play. Her mommy was close by and hurrying to finish her work so they could go have some fun. 1 minute is all it took for a monster to grab Kali, and her mother never saw her again. The monster is brought to justice in the strangest way. So let's talk about Kali. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break bad habits. And no, we are not talking about some witch doctor, no secret medications. We are talking about today's sponsor, Fume. And they look at a potential solution you may be interested in. Not every bad habit is wrong. So instead of a drastic uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from the habit? Fume is innovative, award-winning, flavored air device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. No plugs, no cords, no nothing, all natural. Instead of a vapor, Fume uses flavored air, and instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural delicious flavors. Here are a few of their flavors. Some of my favorites are the crisp mint, and my second is the orange vanilla. Very good flavors. I haven't had a bad one yet. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. It fills the void in a natural, guilt-free way. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial on the bottom, and it is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing while you break the habit. I was surprised at how sleek the heft of the design of the Fume, and the flavor is there with so much more than I expected in a very good way. Stopping is something we all put off because it is flipping hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 150,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there is no reason that it cannot be you, boo. You can do it. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com/Kimberly Flower or scan the QR code or use Kimberly Flower to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. You can upgrade your Journey Pack to the Solano to enjoy the premium walnut barrel and onyx black coated mouthpiece that has a smoother finish and still get 10% off. That's tryfum.com and use code Kimberly Flower to save an additional 10% off on your order today. On May 3rd, 1994, 4-year-old Kali Ann Poulton was riding her pink and white big wheel in front of her apartment on the sidewalk. She went back and forth where her mom could see her and hear her from where she was working inside. Kali and her mom, Judy Gifford, lived in East Rochester, New York, on Glenson Circle in the apartment complex. When Kali was born on September 20th, 1989, Judy and Kali's dad, David Poulton, had been together, but they separated when Kali was about 3 years old. They were still friends, and Kali saw her dad all the time. Judy, being a single mom, she took on a second job with a magazine company so that she could save money for a trip to Walt Disney World the next summer. Judy's job required her to put inserts in magazines and then deliver them to the customers. On this May afternoon, it was so nice outside, and Kali begged her mother, Judy, until she finally caved to let her play outside the door while she finished the last of the magazines that she was stuffing. When she was done, She was going to take Kaylee to the local McDonald's for a treat and let her play on the playground. She made Kaylee promise that she would only ride the big wheel right in front of the apartment on the sidewalk where Judy could see her. About 10 minutes later, at 6:45, Judy finished stuffing the magazines and was ready to carry them to the car, so she went outside to get Kali. But when she went outside the door, Kali was nowhere to be seen. She started yelling her name, and then she realized she couldn't hear the big wheel either. She couldn't hear the ticking of the wheels. As she moved further and further away from the apartment, she started to panic. She was running around the courtyard, yelling loudly for Kaylee for all to hear, and it was desperate. The neighbors outside started helping Judy look for her, and other neighbors heard her calling and came out to help as well. That moment that Judy was feeling is in all mothers' nightmare, that they go out to grab their child and they're nowhere to be found. And if you've ever had those mistakes where you go out and you look for them and they just happen to move, but that instant panic, could you imagine that just going on and on? Oh my gosh. I feel so bad for Judy, but let's move on. After looking for her for a few minutes, Judy ran back inside and she ended up calling 911. Police and fire rescue responded within minutes. Immediately, patrol deputies and common officers coordinated a physical search that included all 300 of the apartment complex houses, the apartments. Most people readily allowed the officers to search their apartments and units where no one was home. The manager went in with an officer. They continued looking through the night while detectives interviewed the parents, their friends, and family. At 4 a.m., the incident was reclassified as a missing person to a kidnap investigation, which brought in major crimes unit to take over the case. The detective speaking with Judy asked if there was anybody that wanted to hurt Kaylee or wanted to hurt her or anybody in the family. And of course, Judy answers with, I cannot think of anybody that would want to hurt me, Kaylee, or my family. But then they asked if anyone new had moved into the complex recently. Judy said yes, a young couple with an 18-month-old son had just moved in. When probing further about the family, Judy said this man, 24-year-old Mark Christie, creeped her out. She just did not get good vibes from this man anytime that she ran into him. She said that his interactions around and about Kaylee made her very uncomfortable. She was used to people telling her that Kaylee was a pretty little girl. You always get those nice comments. But this was a little bit different. His comment was just a little unsettling. And this is why. Because Mark told her, quote, your daughter is a very precious little girl. And then Judy, unquote, and Judy's like, okay, yeah, thank you. Okay. She tried to shrug it off, but then he continued, and your daughter is the prettiest. He said, quote, I've looked at all the other little girls in the complex, and your daughter is the prettiest, unquote. I just get chills just hearing that. What? This man, he's so bold. He's like, yeah, I've looked at all the little girls and your daughter is the prettiest. Creeps me out. Also, one time he asked her if she thought Kaylee would tell her if someone tried to touch her. She answered yes. And after that, she went out of her way to avoid him. Prior to that, Kaylee liked playing with Mark's young son, Alex, on the slide, at the playground, in the complex. Judy was just too freaked out by Mark and made sure that she and Kaylee were never around them anymore. They were at the park. Kaylee and Judy were not at the park. It just, who asked that question? If somebody touches your daughter, do you think she would tell you? Like, what? What? So when the detectives heard this, they immediately went to question Mark Christie. He was brought down to the police station and questioned for hours. Remember, all the apartments had already been searched. So his had been searched as well, and they did not find any sign of Kaylee, her big wheel, nothing. No blood, no nothing. They also had Mark take a polygraph, which he indeed passed. Two of the detectives, Passmore and Craw, still believe Mark was the one that took Kaylee. Unfortunately, Judy herself had seen Mark that day. When she came out yelling for Kaylee, at some point, she saw Mark outside. She told the detectives that Mark was carrying baby Alex, his son, and headed towards the playground. When she passed him, she asked if he had seen Kaylee, and he said no and continued to the playground. The weird thing she noticed is that his shoelaces were missing from his sneakers. He did later join the search for little Kaylee, so technically he had an alibi of sorts. Most of the task force discarded Mark as a suspect after hearing the alibi, and he passed a polygraph. Passmore and Craw thought he'd lied to them throughout his whole interview. They let him know that they would be around when he was ready to talk. The investigation continued, and although they were handed thousands of calls and interviews from people, the leads just dried up and the case went cold. During the next 2 years, Judy did everything she could to keep Kaylee's case in the spotlight. She went on every local and national news show that would have her. She was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and Kaylee was featured twice on America's Most Wanted. Judy made sure that Kaylee's flyers were plastered everywhere locally she could, and then she thought bigger. She talked several airlines into inserting Kaylee's flyer into ticket jackets. She distributed the flyers at county fairs, toll booths, car windows, and office walls. It was her mission to keep the story alive. Her friends and neighbors helped her grow the reward fund to over $100,000. There was a tip line, and some sightings did come in, which they checked out, of course, but none led to her discovery. On August 9th, 1996, 2 years after her disappearance, a big tip came into the police. A woman named Lacey said she'd had a terrible argument with her husband that night, and he confessed to killing Kaylee. Apparently, she told him she was going to leave him because of his strange behavior. He told her he killed Kaylee as some sort of ploy for sympathy. I mean, I'm trying to envision who does that. They're in the middle of an argument where their wife says they're going to leave them, and for some sympathy, they confess to killing a child. Well, his wife was not buying it. She grabbed their young son, Alex, and left for her father's house, where she called the police to report Mark. She was not into that at all. However, in New York State, they consider what Mark told her to fall under spousal privilege, so the detectives needed to talk to him. Mark and Lacey had only been married for 3 weeks and had moved to a new area. They had moved to Ganada, which is in Wayne County and 50 miles east of Rochester. Detective Craw learned that Mark was still at home, so he drove there to see if he would talk to him. When he got there, he was met by Mark's mother, who told him they'd already contacted an attorney and Mark would not be speaking to him. Despite this, Mark still agreed to go to Craw to get a cup of coffee. When they got in the car, Mark rode in the front seat uncuffed because he was not in custody. Mark said that he would go with Craw as long as the detective took him to his attorney afterwards. They headed back to Monroe County because Kra had stayed friendly, or at the very least open, with Mark over the last 2 years. The two were relatively comfortable around each other. On the way to Rochester, Kra suggested that they stop and grab some lunch, and Mark loved the idea. Mark said he was starving. They agreed and stopped at an Italian restaurant, Roncone's, I believe is the name. While they were waiting for their food, Mark said that he felt bad about what he'd done to Kaylee. He said he'd been haunted for the last 2 years with Kaylee's face on missing posters everywhere. Kra played into Mark's ego and said that, he'd beaten the police fair and square. He would later say that he said this because he knew that Mark had a chip on his shoulder about police, and it really did work. It did play into Mark's ego. Mark said he didn't want to sound like he was bragging or anything, but he thought the way he'd eluded the police by getting rid of the big wheel was ingenious. He is just full of himself. He asked Kra if he wanted to know how he did it, but Mark warned him that he would only talk about the big wheel, not about what happened with Kaylee. Kra told him that he didn't have to talk about anything that he was not comfortable with. Clearly, the officer just wants to keep him talking, so whatever he wants to say, the officer's gonna listen. Mark told him that the big wheel was still in his apartment for 3 days after the murder, but Kra didn't understand how. So Mark explained that he cut the big wheel down into little pieces and hid it around the house in various places. He said he knew that the police would be able to search every apartment due to the extension circumstances. The exception allowed the police to look for a missing child to preserve the child's life, but not for evidence of a crime. The search of each apartment had to be limited to spaces where a child's body could be concealed in, but nothing smaller. He said he hid the pieces of big wheel in pieces of clothing that were stored in drawers and cabinets, hid them so well that his wife didn't even find them either. Then when he was ready to get rid of them, he put them in a couple of small duffel bags that he carried to his car. There was a police roadblock at the entrance of the apartments. When he took the parts, the police did search his car, but not the small bags. Going from there, Kra started using a common interrogation technique called minimizing. The attempts to minimize the criminal's culpability in the crime by saying, maybe it was an accident, or you didn't plan this, etc. He said Mark asked him how much prison time he was looking at, and he didn't lie. No, he said, you're probably looking at 25 years. Mark said it was unfair that he would have to live his life away from his wife and son. He said that he'd been living his own nightmare for the past 2 years and thought that should count for something. Seriously, this man, why does Judy have to live the rest of her life without her daughter? And you're worried because your actions cause that you're not going to be able to spend time with your wife and son because you've been a little uncomfortable for the last 2 years? How do you think Judy's feeling today? This man. Mark offered to tell Kra how he killed Kali if Kra would arrange for him to see his wife and son afterward. Kra agreed. He said, okay, deal. We'll make that happen. Mark started by saying, I strangled her, but I didn't do anything to her. Kra clarified that he meant that there was no SA. That's what Mark said. He said that afternoon that Kaylee rode her big wheel over to his apartment. He said she wanted to come inside to play with his son Alex. Now, whether this is true or not, this is what Mark said happened. So we can only take it with a grain of salt. After she came in, she went into Alex's room and Mark went into his room. He knew that her mom didn't want her around him, so when she got there, he brought her big wheel in and put it in the kitchen. So this man knew that she wasn't allowed in the house, so he hides the evidence that she's in the house, but he didn't have any ill intentions. Is that what I'm hearing, Mark? His wife was not home, so she was still at work. He said after being there for about 10 minutes, he heard Judy outside yelling for Kali. He said he panicked because he knew that Judy would be mad if she found out that Kali was in his apartment. So he strangled her. He said right about the time her mom started yelling, Kali walked into his bedroom. He strangled her. He said it was a spur of the moment thing. There's one thing to keep in mind. Do you remember the lack of shoelaces? That was what was used. He admitted that later. Did he have to remove them first? Mark, sitting in the restaurant, he said he strangled her with his hands, spur of the moment, because her mom would be mad to find her there. That's a ridiculous story. Detective Craw believing that Mark was molesting Kali, and then he heard her mom calling. He knew she would probably tell her mom, so then he killed her, is what the detective believes. And I believe that as more likely, and I don't believe that she rode her big wheel over there and came in the house and asked to go into the house. I think she was lured there, but we will never know because Mark has his version of what happened. So he said then he brought Kali down to the dining room and placed her on the floor, then carried Alex outside with him to the playground to create an alibi. When he came back in, he put Kali in a laundry basket and covered her with clothes. He said the complex was so chaotic that no one even noticed him carrying the basket out to the trunk of his vehicle. He took his son with him and drove to Nortec Communications Company on Humboldt Street in Rochester, where he worked as a security guard. He drove around by the back door and dropped off the laundry basket. Then he parked in the front of the building and went inside, carrying his young son. He told the security guards on duty that he had forgotten something. He went through to the back and retrieved the laundry basket with Kali's body in it. He climbed into the top of an enclosed 30,000-gallon tank filled with liquid coolant in the air conditioning section. He found a piece of heavy metal equipment in the utility room and tied it around Kali's body. Then he dumped her in the coolant tank. He said he got rid of her clothing and the basket she was wrapped in, but left her earrings on her. At the end of his confession, he said, "It never should have happened. It was a waste." It was a waste. If that's not the understatement of the year, it was a waste. What this man says, he is clearly not grasping the viciousness, the sadness, the desperation, the tragic. He just isn't great. He's like, it was a waste. I just wish I wouldn't have done that. It's what? Anyways, when they left the restaurant, they went to the police headquarters. He gave Mark his phone so that he could call his attorney to come see him. He also arranged for his wife and son, as promised, a deal's a deal, to come see him. Mark was arrested that night and charged with Kali's murder. Initially, his lawyer tried to get his confession tossed, but it didn't work because there was no grounds. He was giving this information voluntarily. Mark pled guilty to second-degree murder as part of his plea bargain, where they would drop the kidnapping charge. He was sentenced to 25 to life in prison. Just in case you're curious about old Mark, Kali was not his first victim. He also killed a 72-year-old woman 6 years before Kali. Mark was interviewed and passed a polygraph in that case as well, even though some detectives thought he did it. A different man, Frank Sterlings, was convicted and served just over 18 years in prison due to a false confession. After Mark's DNA was in the system, they went back to see if they could get touch DNA off of Viola Manville's clothes. That was her name of the 72-year-old woman, Viola. They did get a match for, you guessed it, Mark. This other man spent 18 years in prison because the interview tactics and everything that they were doing, it made him confess. They broke him down so much that he confessed to a murder that he just didn't do. He once again pled guilty to second-degree murder and received another 20 years to life sentence for Viola. He is currently incarcerated at Sing Sing in New York, and his earliest parole is in 2041, actually, 2041. In front of the apartment complex on Gleason Circle, they started a flower garden for Kali that is tended and grows more each year. This is the first place that Judy goes every year to remember Kali. Judy has decided not to let Mark take her life from her. She has remarried, and her husband Floyd have been together for 20 years.
This time, friend, such a different end. Now she's gone, gone, gone. Goes on for Kali. Leave the porch light on for you. We burn the candles, say the prayers.
I hope that Judy finds solace in knowing not that her daughter is no longer alive, but that empty feeling that maybe she is, or that has been answered, that the killer is going to do his time, is doing his time, and is caught. Because I just cannot imagine going for years and years and not knowing what happened in that what if feeling. So anyways, Mark is a clear piece of work. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this one. I'd like to thank all my channel members and my Patreons who continue to support me. If you would like early access to new videos or decide the cases I cover next, you can do so by clicking the join button. Well, if you have made it to the end, you are a rock star, and I love you to death. There are more true crime cases in my Crimey Cases playlist for you to check out. Stay safe, my loves, and remember, if you see something, say something. Bye.
Leave the porch light on for you.